Canon PowerShot G7X Mark III. I'm going to talk about a few of the things that I really like about the G7 Mark III and also the G7 Mark II. And then I'm going to compare these two cameras' video features. I'm going to do a video test later. And I'm also going to talk about the things that I do not like, at least for right now, with the G7X Mark III. Now, the things that I like about the G7X Mark III, and some of it's taken from the G7X Mark II. First thing, the body design. Body design is really great. It fits in your pocket. It's very small and compact. The grips have improved since the G2, the G7X Mark II. This is a little thicker up here, and in the thumb, it has increased in its grippiness and its size. If you compare it to the G7 Mark II, you can see that the Mark II had a smaller grip and the thumb was more recessed. The next thing I like about this camera is the lens. It's 24 to 100 millimeter zoom lens, which is exactly the same as the Mark II, and it starts from a 1.8 at the wide angle, and it zooms in to a 2.8. It stops down to a 2.8 when it goes all the way into 100 millimeters. That's same as the Mark II. I don't even notice a quality difference between the two lenses. To me, it seems like the same lens. Next thing I like about this camera are the full manual exposure controls in video mode. I'm switched to the video mode and the video mode dial here, and I have the option of many things. First, I can control everything with a touch screen, and I can control an ND filter on or off. There's only one level of it, but that one level does help when you're outdoors. And then when I'm in manual mode, manual exposure, I get my triangle, my ISO, aperture, and my shutter speed. And by touching it, I could dial it all in. Next thing are the codecs, the video codecs. We finally get 4K 30p. And that is a 120 megabits codec. You have full HD at 120p. That's also 120 megabits codec. And then you have HD at 60p, which is a 60 megabits codec, and a HD 30p, which is a 30 megabits codec. Those are all standard H.264 bit rates, but having that 4K 30p at 120, it's a little bit above what Panasonic offers at 100 megabits and what Sony offers at 100 megabits, but not as great as the other 1-inch censored camcorders, which start at 150 megabits. Next thing I like about this camera is a clean HDMI. You have an HDMI micro right there, and then if you connect this to an external recorder, you get clean HDMI. I don't think it's 10-bit. It's probably most likely 8-bit, but I haven't tested that yet. The other thing I like about this camera is the low light abilities. When you're in 4K, you can go all the way up to ISO 3200. When you're in HD, you can go all the way up to ISO 6400. And because you have such a wide f-stop on the extreme wide angle of the lens, so if you're at 24 millimeters, you can get 1.8, and that's a lot of light. That's as almost like having a much larger sensor than the 1-inch sensor here on cameras that start at a 2.8 at its widest aperture. Next thing I like about this is the touch focus and just all the touch controls up here. You can flip it up in selfie mode like so, and then touch on your face, and then it should, for the most part, hold focus as long as you're within the range of the frame. It's not dual pixel autofocus, but it's fairly good. I'm going to get into some of the shortcomings of it, but for the most part, you're sitting in front of the camera, you're touching your face, or you're holding the camera out in front of you, you're touching, or you're shooting some other things, you're shooting your friends, and you touch to focus. Works fine. The last thing I really like about this camera, and this is one of the standout features of the G7X Mark III, is the microphone jack finally, a 3.5 millimeter microphone jack on a camera of this size. Now Sony's RX100s, I think it's the Mark VII or the Mark VIII at this point, that also has a 3.5 millimeter mic jack. Compared to the G7X Mark II, I can't tell the difference in weight. It feels very much the same with the exception of the new grip. All of the dials and the buttons are a little different, but they're very much the same in a lot of ways. You can see the dials right here. With the Mark II, you have the ring here that has clicks, and then also a switch where you can declick the ring. This is good when you want to use the ring as for a manual focus. So if you're shooting video and you want to do manual focus, you can barely hear the ring move because you switched off the clicks. The Mark III got rid of the switch, so all you have are the clicks. I think that's a step backwards. Next thing that I don't really like about the G7X Mark III, and this is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. There are no 24p codecs. 23.98p, none of those codecs are there in 4K, HD, or even 720. They have a PAL here, switchable, so it's NTSC to PAL. So if you go to PAL, you can get 4K at 25, HD at 25p, but all the 24 frame rates are gone, which a lot of professional, semi-professional, and just YouTubers like to shoot 24. It was all packed in on the G7X Mark II, but gone from the G7X Mark III. I'm hoping they put that back in with the firmware. Don't know why they didn't include the 24p. Next thing, which I have not experienced yet, but I've been reading it's a problem, is the overheating of the camera and the shutdown when you're shooting 4K. I guess the processor, the size of the camera, the battery, it all factors into pumping a lot of juice into the camera where it just cannot handle it and it overheats and shuts down. I haven't experienced it yet, but I've read that it's becoming a problem. Next thing I don't like about this is the limited recording time, which ties into the overheating. There's a limited recording time in 4K and in 120p HD. So having the 4K 30p is great, amazing, and this is the reason why you would want to upgrade from the Mark II to the Mark III is for the 4K, but you're limited to 10 minutes, to under 10 minutes of record time, and then you gotta start and stop again, or the camera's just gonna overheat and you're not gonna be able to use it for a little bit. With the HD 120p, that's great that you finally have 120p at a high bit rate at 120 megabits, but you're limited to 7 minutes of record time. Not that with slow motion you're going to record longer than that. Usually with slow motion you tend to record slow clips, but they cap you off at 7 minutes. If you're shooting regular HD in either 60p or 30p, you're getting 30 minutes, which is the same as the limitation on the G7X Mark II. The other thing I just discovered in a video test of these two cameras, and I'm going to put the video test next in the next section of this video. I was doing a side-by-side comparison, and I noticed that the autofocus was a little slow and sometimes inaccurate on the G7X Mark III compared to the Mark II. It was slower in HD and also slower in 4K that I noticed on the LCD screen compared to the Mark II. And I wasn't really doing much different. I was in the same lighting conditions, the same shooting conditions, and the Mark III just either felt slower or things didn't look in focus. Maybe a firmware upgrade will fix that, or maybe there's something wrong with my camera, or maybe I just got to get used to it and shoot better. This is the version 2, Mark II. You have a regular USB and micro HDMI. With the version 3, you have still the micro HDMI, but now a USB-C port. And the USB-C port, since it's such a powerful connection, I was hoping that I could power the camera with a USB-C port and plug it into a battery pack or the wall, and then run this camera continuously. From what I've read on the Canon's website, you're not able to do that. It's only meant for either connecting to your computer to transfer the files, or it's meant for charging the battery in the camera. However, you need to buy a proprietary USB-C charger connection from Canon. I tried to use it with my own third-party USB-C cables, and I plugged it into the wall, I plugged it into my computer, and the battery wouldn't charge. So it must be some kind of thing, a lock that they only allow for Canon cameras. So I think that this is kind of a bad thing, because why put a feature in there that could really make this camera a lot more useful and compact with the USB-C features, but then only make it proprietary and then also limit the usage of the USB-C. Here's my setup that I'm going to test these two cameras out right now, the video quality. This is the Mark III and the Mark II. I have this little rig here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a video, I'm going to run a video side by side, have them on at the same time, and I am going to test the 4K with the Mark III. So I'm going to test the 4K against the 1080 on the Mark II. Okay, here is the G7X Mark II. This is the G7X Mark III. I'm shooting on shooting at 1080p, full HD. I have the settings on both cameras as identical as I could make it. The ND filter is on. It's on auto ISO, 1/60th shutter speed, f2.8 with the ND filter. I think I said that before. Autofocus is on. I'm going to touch my dog's face with a touch screen. It's both recording right now. It's on the neutral picture profile with the sharpness dialed all the way down, but everything else is set in the middle, factory set. The audio is on automatic. There's the wind suppression attenuation on. From the LCD screen, which I cannot tell which is better, it looks like the Mark III is exposing for my dog's face better than the Mark II. The Mark II seems blown out right on his face, on his white fur. I'm zoomed out of both cameras, so this is at 24 millimeters. Yeah, it does seem like the Mark III is handling the highlights a lot better than the Mark II. Here's the Mark III on the right and the Mark II on the left. Now I have everything dialed into manual. I'm shooting at 1080 full HD, 30p. The ISO is manually set to 125. The shutter speed is 1/60th. The f-stop is 5.6 and the ND filter is turned on. It's on autofocus. The colors look pretty similar, although to my eye on the LCDs, this is just judging the LCDs, which I shouldn't be doing. I should wait till I bring this into my computer. I have the image stabilization on standard on both of these cameras. I'm not sure if it's the LCD screen, but the Mark III looks softer in focus than the Mark II. Maybe it's just because the exposure's a little different. I'm not sure why that is. The Mark II looks like has more compression and also better focus. But that's just me looking at the LCD screen. Now here's a little different. I have everything set the same way I did before. ISO 125, 5.6 f-stop, 1/60th shutter speed, NDs are on. But now I have the Mark III in 4K mode. This is UHD 4K at 30p, and the Mark II 30p at full HD. Checking to see if I can tell the difference between 1080 and 4K. Let's zoom out. Let's see if I can zoom out both at the same time. I'm back inside now. The only thing I changed, well, there's two things I changed. I took off the ND filter off of both cameras. So there's no ND. The Mark III is shooting UHD 4K 30p, and the Mark II is shooting 30p HD, full HD. It's at 1/60th shutter speed, f2.8, ISO is locked in at 125. I had the autofocus on, and I tapped my dog's face, which both cameras seem to be locked on. But let's see if the autofocus stays on my dog, or if it drifts, if it catches his face again. That's interesting. The Mark III does not catch on my dog's face when I drift, but the Mark II does. How can that be? Is the Mark II's autofocus more consistent than the Mark III? That was my test with these two cameras' video modes. I haven't looked at it on my computer yet. I'm just from the LCD screens. Some things that I noticed was the focus. Mark III, the focus was hunted a little bit more, and it seemed to be darker. Either that or it handled the dynamic range better. Not sure. I'm a big fan of Canon, and that's why when the Mark III came out, I just got it immediately because I just thought, as long as it's with like the Mark II, but with 4K, I'm in. And you know, I'm gonna use this as my primary YouTube camera for all my videos going forward. I'm gonna test to see if that 10-minute record limit is gonna be a big deal for me or not. If you're a YouTuber or a vlogger or someone who uses video a lot and you have longer videos, this might not be the camera, and you want 4K, this might not be the camera for you. But if you do shorter clips and you're a vlogger and you want something that you can just set up really simple and not have to worry about a lot of features, because on full auto, this actually, or at least the Mark II, works very well. And now with the 4K, the quality should just be a lot better. Mark II is still very good. It's a very good and capable camera, and it has 24p. That's another big thing. If you need to shoot 24p, you're not going to get it from the G7X Mark III, at least not for now.